the 7th console generation. A lot of people are nostalgic for it now. And if you were like me and you were in the Nintendo sphere, you probably remember the discourse that kind of centered around Mario and Sonic games, specifically whether or not the latest Sonic game released on the Wii was a direct ripoff of a previously released Mario game. And I thought it would be kind of cool to do a comparison between Sonic and Mario games and kind of mega series, I guess you could say. And what better way to start off a series like that than with a direct comparison to see which game is better between Mario Kart Wii and its ultimate easiest to write off as a ripoff Sonic clone, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. So before I go in depth about these games, I just want to make a little bit of a disclosure here. So I am recording, of course, Mario Kart Wii directly off of a Nintendo Wii. I'm not using any emulators or anything like that, no performance boosts or anything. I'm using the Wii specifically and exclusively in this video. As for Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, I am going to be showing pretty much exclusively the PC version of this game. But I have extensive experience with the Wii version of this game. And so, even though you'll be seeing mostly PC stuff, I think it's still going to be pretty fair because I probably have more hours logged in on the Wii version than I do the PC version. So keep that in mind. Also, I made sure to complete all of these games, both of these games, before doing the direct comparison, so they should be equally thorough to each other. So, without further ado, let's get right into it.
Mario Kart Wii! Woohoo!
So I'm going to actually be totally honest here. When Mario Kart Wii released in 2008, I had no idea, actually. Actually, when Mario Kart Wii came out, my brother and I were still playing GameCube and DS at the time. And so, at least for me, I don't remember ever being aware that Mario Kart Wii was the latest Mario Kart. But we had Mario Kart Double Dash, and there was a lot of DS download multiplayer battles and races on Mario Kart DS on the bus rides to school that kept us occupied. So we weren't without our Mario Kart fix, so to speak. I think I first became aware of Mario Kart Wii when I saw my cousins playing it at my aunt's house, which was really interesting because my aunt and cousins, my uncle, that family, they weren't really a family of gamers, but they had a Wii, which kind of says a lot about what the Wii is, you know? But when I first saw that game, I thought it was the coolest game ever. It was the ultimate Mario Kart because while it did have a bunch of really cool, really fun new tracks, it also brought back a lot of old ones from Super Mario Kart and Mario Kart 64, the legendary, untouchable, the one that I was extremely nostalgic for back in the day because I had only seen gameplay of it in person and I thought it was really cool. I really wanted a Nintendo 64 really bad. It was my dragon that I was chasing. Anyway, and there was also the redone tracks from Mario Kart Double Dash, which I thought was really cool. A lot of the cool revisions of Mario Kart Double Dash tracks and Mario Kart DS tracks too. It had the greatest hits from all of the previous games, plus new hits for the Wii. At the time, this was the ultimate Mario Kart. Of course, now we have Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is like, you know, no looking back. Nobody even talks about Mario Kart 7 anymore. But Mario Kart Wii was like that event. It was like Brawl when it was released, Smash Brothers Brawl. It was just the ultimate in its series. you couldn't really look back, and you couldn't imagine what more there could be in the future. So after spending all this time on the game, I've decided that the best way to start out this whole thing is to talk about, I guess, the graphics first. Mario Kart Wii is a very interesting game graphically, because if you were to compare it to its predecessor, Mario Kart Double Dash, it kind of looks worse. And by that I mean there's a lot less detail on the characters and the karts and even the tracks, and the colors are really washed out. They're very washed out, in fact. A much more muted color palette. And it's interesting too, because this came out during a time when the meme was that all the big AAA games at the time were all shades of gray, brown, black, and maybe purple if you wanted to put some pizzazz in there. Completely different from nowadays. But yeah, and so looking back at Mario Kart Wii, this was considered a colorful game. And now it just looks like everything was put through a blurry kind of yellow filter, almost like a bright yellow. And it kind of mutes all of the colors in a way that, you could say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Some people, for some reason, really hate the graphical appearance of, let's say, Super Mario 64 or Halo Combat Evolved, right? I don't know why, but people hate the way those games look. Those people exist. They're out there. It's okay to have that wrong opinion, I suppose. But graphics become an issue when they interfere with the gameplay. And that's the key thing here. For me, I can deal with the graphical downgrades, lower poly models and blurrier textures on the karts and characters and everything like that. That's fine. And I think I understand why they did that. It's to kind of expand the number of characters on the track. Instead of 8, there's 12. Okay, fine, I guess. But I think the biggest problem I had was that mostly when it comes to bananas, because everything has that kind of muted sort of yellowish, this really light yellowish kind of filter to it. Because of that, bananas are particularly difficult to see and avoid. And this might sound like a nitpick and stuff, but when you're trying to optimize your racing lines, get the drifts down, the boosts down, and everything like that, especially on the higher difficulties and the more difficult tracks, a lot of the times you'll find yourself running into bananas that you didn't even see coming, just because bananas blend in so well thanks to that muted color palette. And that's something that I've always, well, not always, but that's something that I really did encounter quite a bit in this game. And that's why I believe that graphically this game isn't quite where it ought to be, even for a Wii game. And of course, this isn't the only sort of Wii kind of sequel to a GameCube game that has kind of lowered its graphical fidelity, but this is definitely a case where that lowered fidelity actually harms the gameplay, at least a little sippy bit. But as far as the graphical appearance of this game is concerned, it's all right. It's fine. It does what it needs to do well enough most of the time. Rainbow Road isn't as vivid as I would like it to look, of course, and playing this through composite or component really doesn't matter. All it really does is change the video output from 480i to 480p. That's really all it does. So, there's something left to be desired in an aesthetic way, but as far as the game itself is concerned, it's aight. It's aight. Next, I kind of want to talk about controls, and this is a big one, okay? So the Wii is hated by a lot of people for its motion controls. And of course, Mario Kart Wii, being a first-party Nintendo title, of course there's going to be some incorporation of motion controls in this game. And what is that, you might ask? Well, the Wii Remote and the Wii Wheel. Actually, there are a number of different ways you can control this game. Of course, you have the Wii Remote by itself, the Wii Wheel, the Wii Classic controller, the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, and the GameCube controller even. It's one of the most compatible games in terms of its control methods, its control input options. And so let's start from worst to best, shall we? The worst way to control this game by far is with the Wii Remote in the Wii Wheel. Now, a lot of people might ask, well, wait a minute. The Wii Wheel doesn't change anything. It's just a piece of plastic that you put your Wii Remote in. It controls the same as the Wii Remote by itself. And you are correct about that assertion. However, the way the Wii Wheel kind of incentivizes you to interact with it differently, slightly differently from the Wii Remote. And it's going to be difficult to explain, but I'll try to explain it. So, when you have the Wii Wheel and with the Wii Remote inside it, you want to hold it like an actual steering wheel, right? And so you're tilting the Wii Remote where the face is pointed towards you, and then tilting it side to side there. That is the suboptimal way of using the Wii Remote for steering, because you're not going to get the full motion, the full left and right, the lateral motion that you need in order to steer a car. And so when you're driving, like you're holding the Wii wheel like the Wii Remote, or like a regular steering wheel, you're not going to be able to turn as sharply as you would normally be able to. And it's very, very troublesome. So that's kind of what makes it the worst. So, okay, pop the Wii Remote out and, do it normally, where you have the face of the Wii Remote pointing up towards the ceiling, and then you tilt it side to side like that. Still, there's a problem with that. The thing is, the steering is actually very slow with the Wii Remote, just by itself with the motion controls, which is really, it sounds like, I'm just speculating about this, but here's the thing, okay? I've played other driving games on the Wii that uses the same kind of layout, the same kind of controller layout, same motion controls, really nothing different. And they respond much better, much quicker, and much more naturally the way they should than with Mario Kart Wii and the Wii Remote just by itself. And I don't know why that is the case. Drifting in Mario Kart Wii, it doesn't matter. Need for Speed Pro Street feels more responsive than Mario Kart Wii. How EA is able to get it right and Nintendo isn't able to get their own control scheme correct, I have no idea, but it just doesn't work very well. It is probably the worst way. And Chief, my best anecdote for this is, I remember I was playing Mario Kart Wii with a bunch of other people, and everybody was using the Wii Remote, but I chose the GameCube controller, and I was destroying everybody, and they thought I was just really good at the game. And I said, well, you have the GameCube controller, let's switch. Then they started dominating everybody. Then they got mad at me. They're like, oh, you were cheating the whole time. It's like, no, I just know how this game controls with a Wii Remote. And I chose the better controller input. So, yeah, if you're trying to complete this game or get all the gold trophies or on all the difficulties or whatever, don't play with the Wii Remote by itself, or especially with the Wii Wheel, just no. So, okay, you might ask, how about the Wii Remote Nunchuck input method? I suppose that would work, but it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of awkward. Like, you steer with the nunchuck analog stick, and I don't know. I could never really get that down. It just felt too disjointed. And I'm not one to be opposed to that controller input method for other games, like, let's say, Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess or something like that. But just in this case, it's just sort of like, it just feels awkward. It doesn't feel like a driving game should, I guess. And I like racing games, and I guess, maybe as a creature of habit, I have a certain preference for the way to control it. So, what kind of controller to use or whatever. So I don't know. Take that with a grain of salt, I suppose. But it's not terrible. It's like right in the middle, I suppose. Okay. Now, this one's going to be maybe a little bit controversial, but the next one, the second best way to control this game is with the GameCube controller. But there's a caveat there. See, here's the thing, okay? I grew up really learning to master the controls, the physics, the driving in Mario Kart Double Dash, the combat, all of that. And, of course, that's on the GameCube, so you have to use the GameCube controller, right? And so when you grow up like me, playing Mario Kart Double Dash for insane amounts of time, really getting down to the nitty gritty with like all the, well, I don't want to say with the nitty gritty, but you're trying to master the controls and the gameplay and everything like that, you have a muscle memory when you pick up a GameCube controller, right? The controls in Mario Kart Wii are different from Mario Kart Double Dash. And so, personally, my performance in Mario Kart Wii with the GameCube controller is actually not as good as it should be, because in my mind, I'm still thinking Mario Kart Double Dash controls. I'm instantly going to like X to launch weapons, or that sort of stuff, when launching weapons isn't there, and you have to kind of just relearn everything again. And it's not the best, at least for me, but I would highly recommend it over the other previously mentioned ones. But yeah, drifting and everything like that, it's so slightly different, but it's very disorienting for someone who is really well acquainted with Mario Kart Double Dash control layout. So be warned with that. That's why I put it under here. But then you have the Wii Classic controller. That's number one in my opinion. Doesn't matter if it's the Pro or the normal one. Doesn't matter. This is the best way to control the game in my opinion. And the reason why I say that is because it feels like a DualShock controller, kinda. As someone who is a huge fan of the Gran Turismo series, especially Gran Turismo 2, I like that DualShock sort of layout. Of course, it kind of is like if a DualShock controller and a Super Nintendo controller kind of morphed together into some blobular form. But if you're able to get used to that, everything is really well within your, you don't have to like do any weird aerobics or anything in order to, reach certain things. Everything is right there, really not too close, not too far. The D-pad is a lot better than the GameCube controller's D-pad. The analog stick is acceptable. The face buttons are just good enough, and the triggers are excellent. And so when you break all of that down, what you get is honestly the best way to control it, because aside from that, it's also the game's control, the button layout and everything like that is optimized for, obviously, first and foremost, Wii hardware, and that includes things like the classic controller. And so everything just feels natural and right with this. Yeah, it kind of sounds maybe a little arbitrary, but that's my personal opinion. That's my personal experience. The Wii Classic controller is by far the best way to go about controlling this game. So if you can get one or find one or whatever, I feel that that's the most optimal way to control Mario Kart Wii. And if you can find a GameCube controller. It's kind of a fairly distant number 2, but it's there. Never use the Wii wheel. Use the Wii remote by itself only in the most desperate of situations. More desperate as in you don't have any working nunchucks. Now we're at gameplay. And this is the part, this right here, gameplay. So, where do I begin? Mario Kart wrote the book on kart racers, going all the way back to Super Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo. Of course, nowadays a lot of people kind of ignore that game exists, compared to what Mario Kart 64, sort of the precedent that set kind of rendered that style irrelevant. Of course, you did have Super Circuit that came out on the Game Boy Advance, but even fewer people talk about that one. So, it is what it is. Mario Kart Wii, however, is an interesting game. Now, I should make myself clear on the fact that I'm talking about this as a single-player experience exclusively, and a single-player experience with the intent to get all of the gold trophies on all of the Grand Prix on all difficulty levels, okay? And so if you are going to do this or considering doing that sort of thing, this is sort of the discussion you might be interested in terms of gameplay. So the gameplay is very, very interesting. It is definitely the most, well, I don't want to say the most different Mario Kart, but let's start from, I don't know, let's talk about items. So items are kind of what defines a kart racer, essentially. And so that combat is sort of what helps to equalize the playing field. And that's been the case since the very beginning. So the way it's typically balanced in a kart racer is that the guys in front usually get defensive items or weapons or whatever. That being typically bananas for the most part. Banana peels or whatever you want to call it. And then the people in the rear usually get like the super offensive ones. The farther back you are, the more potent the item will be. Now in Mario Kart 64, that usually was something like maybe red shells or maybe even the blue shell. More often than not, it would be a gold mushroom or a star or something along those lines. The blue shell was much different back then, and most people already are aware of that. But in Mario Kart Double Dash, the blue shell got its wings, essentially, and Mario Kart DS, that also, there was the bullet bill that was introduced and the blooper with the ink on everybody else, obscuring vision, and all of that sort of culminates in Mario Kart Wii. I've heard Mario Kart Wii described as as akin to like a pachinko machine. At least I think so. Or maybe a slot machine. I always kind of thought of it as a pachinko machine because of the items. Here, the thing is, Mario Kart Wii is meant to be, kind of like a party racing game for even the most casual people. It's as friendly to a casual player as possible, I guess, because you can get these items that will take you from 12th place and land you in like a podium position in just one use of that weapon or that item, especially the bullet bill or like the star or the blue shell, especially the blue shell if you want to just snipe the people in first, second, and third place in some cases. If you really want to do that, that exists, right? Going from last to first. And because of that, you sacrifice skill, the value of skill. Now, that's not to say that on higher difficulties, it doesn't take some level of skill to land in a podium position, especially first place. But more often than not, it's keeping first, second, or third place that's the issue. A lot of the time, what you'll find is you might land in first place, but you're not going to be there for very long, especially on the higher difficulties, because someone is going to end up sniping you. And even if you're in first place the entire race, there's only one. It only takes one blue shell, one well-placed blue shell for everybody to just blow past you, and you can go from first to like 7th very, very quickly. And that can be very frustrating. And there's very little means of avoiding that. And that's really like the biggest thing. While the people in last place can shoot ahead really easily, there's no real counter that people in the higher places and towards the front of the pack can do to sort of mitigate or limit that. And so what is supposed to be a balance, a kind of an equalizer, ends up more along the lines of, the strategy becomes something more like, well, sit in 4th place until like the middle of the 3rd lap, and then, fight your way into first place if you can. And that's because the blue shell in particular is extremely overpowered. This is probably the most overpowered blue shell because it will home in directly on the first place. And the explosion, the blast radius, is so large that it can take up a large number of racers, not just first place, but even 2nd, 3rd, and I've even seen 4th place get hit by the resulting explosion of the blue shell. And because of that, again, it feels like a pachinko machine where, like, yeah, maybe there's skill in sort of knowing the strength to which, like, you should launch the little ball, but where the ball ends up falling, it really is just dependent on kind of luck, especially on the higher difficulties. 50cc is, for the most part, really easy. You won't have too many complications there across all the tracks. 100cc uses only bikes, and then 150 is karts and bikes together, and that's where you're going to find the most trouble. And the thing with 100cc actually is that for the most part the difficulty is on the same level, I think, as 50cc. I didn't notice any real difficulty, I guess, like any greater difficulty in 100cc compared to 50cc. Once you get up to 150, that's where it will really be a test of patience for the most part. How many times are you willing to redo the same Grand Prix over and over again to get that 1 or 2 points that you missed that previous time in order to get that gold trophy? Because it's intense. It's very intense, and not in the most fair way, especially if you earned first place through a mastery of the controls, like drifting and boosts and timing of items and everything like that. Really doesn't matter, because that AI will come through and rubber band itself into first place, and you'll end up finding yourself in last place in some cases at the very last minute of the game. There's a lot of examples of that on the internet. That one, especially on DK Mountain, where someone's in first place on the last lap about to cross that bridge, and then they get hit by a blue shell, and of course it takes time to recover, and then just as they're about to recover, they get slammed with maybe a red or green shell or something, and then it gets knocked all over the place and everything, and they get knocked off the bridge, and then they end up in 12th place on the last lap. It's absurd. It's that level of absurd. And in a multiplayer context, that makes perfect sense. That's what makes the game fun. But if you're trying to beat this game, that's what I always like to say, play it to beat it and then come back to me if you're going to try to defend it, because chances are you're going to come away feeling the same exact way. And in fact, a lot of people do. And that's probably the biggest problem with the gameplay here, is that no matter what exactly you do, no matter how good at the game you really are, it doesn't really end with the result. It's not necessarily guaranteed that you're going to get the result that you probably deserve. And that's probably that is definitely actually the most frustrating aspect of Mario Kart Wii. 50cc is a breeze, 100cc is a breeze, 150 is where all the trouble starts. And the other thing too, and I remember watching a review, I can't remember who it was by, but they mentioned how the karts in this game, all of them are terrible. If you're trying to beat the game, you cannot use a kart. If you use one of the karts, you're not doing as well as you should. Use one of the bikes. And at first I kind of refused that, but then very quickly I realized the bikes are better. Not only can you do the wheelie, but you can also boost more often, and a lot of the times the bike's stats are just better. The drifting feels better, and of course the drifting is different. The controls are different significantly between all the different stats. They actually do matter, and you definitely have to find the bike or the kart that suits your style, something that you can work with, because nothing is ever going to feel as tight or as predictable as Mario Kart Double Dash. It's going to be sort of a compromise. And so for me, as you'll see in my gameplay, or as you've probably already noticed, I'm using like the same one or two bikes for the most part. And that's just because they are the best for me to get around these tracks and to maximize my odds at maybe getting a podium position. Karts, they try to balance out karts with including, the triple boost or whatever, but like when charging up a triple boost takes up more time than just drifting and then getting that one small boost. And then not to mention wheelies, which, they take away a little bit of your control, but on a straight, you'll just run past a cart. And a cart has no answer for that unless they have a boost mushroom just sort of hanging around. But, that's not really going to happen a lot of the time. So, bikes all the way superior in every way. They control better, they handle better, they have more options for gaining speed above your opponents. Everybody can draft, which is something that carried over from Mario Kart DS, where you can stay behind a guy for long enough and then you get a short boost that you can knock them out of the way with. It's all here. Of course, heavier and the weight of your character is also important. I prefer, for the most part, light or medium characters. Heavy characters just nerf acceleration, which is essential in a game where you're going to be hit a lot and come to a full stop. It's something that is absolutely necessary. Acceleration over top speed all the way 100% of the time. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise, in my opinion. But yeah, the gameplay in Mario Kart Wii is rage-inducing at its worst and mildly annoying at best, which if you're trying to beat it and on the higher difficulties, I should point that out. But generally speaking, the first 2/3 of the game, it's actually 50cc is incredibly easy. 100cc is, I guess, a little bit more challenging because you have to get used to bikes after racing karts. But generally speaking, it's really just that adjustment period, which makes it feel maybe a little bit more difficult. But once you master the bikes, you'll never go back to the karts, and 100cc will become sort of forgettable for the most part. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about gameplay. So talking about tracks individually would take way too long. And so Generally speaking, I don't really have any problems with any of the tracks. I guess save for Rainbow Road. I don't know what happened between the first times I ever played this game versus like most recently trying to beat this game, because like for whatever reason I just couldn't find the optimal route, the optimal racing lines for this, and I always ended up falling off. But I think that's more of a me problem than a Wii problem. You get my drift. But as far as this game is concerned, with the tracks, the developers did a lot to try to translate, especially those older tracks, into something that kind of had the gameplay in mind. And a lot of that meant these tracks are a lot more spacious. You look at these tracks and they're very wide, especially when you compare it to Mario Kart Double Dash. And the reason why, I think, is because there's just so many characters on the track at any given time that it's kind of necessary to sort of make things a little bit more spacious, which honestly does a lot good for the game, like in terms of like the quality of the racing is concerned. It never feels extremely claustrophobic, and generally it's great. Honestly, I actually think for the most part taking those older tracks and they translate extraordinarily well with the kind of gameplay that they're trying to go with here. As far as the new tracks are concerned, new tracks are interesting because they all have different gimmicks about them, which help them to stand out. Especially with the conveyor belts on the factory stage, which the name of which I'm totally forgetting right now, but that track in particular is pretty cool. The direction that the conveyor belts are going in determine how fast you can go. Of course, you have to alter the way you go about it because they switch, and sometimes they switch while you're on them, which is pretty cool, I think. And there are a lot of tracks that use things like escalators, for example, or ramps that you can use to do tricks so that you can land and get a nice boost. And there are shortcuts, the desert level in particular. I think that one is the Wii one. The Wii desert track is really good with its like neat shortcuts that you can punch through and kind of get an edge on the other guys. And of course, because of that, there's a lot of replay value in terms of just like optimizing your run, which is really cool for especially for someone like me, and especially for anybody who's trying to, again, maximize their ability to get that gold trophy. Running the track just the vanilla way on the higher difficulties isn't necessarily going to net you a high enough score to even get a podium position in some cases. So you really have to keep an eye out for those shortcuts, and you have to also weigh whether or not you can exploit those shortcuts, because in some cases those shortcuts are off the track, and so your speed will be significantly reduced, and you'll probably need a boost of some kind in order to really optimally, I keep using that word, but reap all the benefits possible from that shortcut as possible. And that's really important, as it turns out, especially again if you're trying to get those gold trophies. And when it comes to the older tracks, again, even the Super Nintendo ones, they play better than they did on the Super Nintendo. It's actually really interesting. The tracks by themselves are really neat. There's so much track variety, and there's so much happening on every track. It's always fun to just kind of go back and replay some of those tracks. And in some cases, it makes those times when you have to go back and replay an entire Grand Prix in order to get that gold trophy just a little less painful. And you gotta respect that. Nintendo put a lot of effort into making so many of these tracks, including so many tracks, and keeping them feeling fresh no matter how many times you repeat them. And that repetition leading to mastery of those tracks is also a really cool thing. And replay value is something that people are just now starting to recognize, aside from the old, maybe 7-8 years ago, when people were saying that a game needs to have like a 40-hour long story at least in order to be worth what you're paying for, completely ignoring replay value. I think these tracks alone really help to give this game a really strong sense of replay value, and that can't be understated. Despite every complaint that I had about the gameplay, it's almost worth it just because the tracks are so... Even the most straightforward ones, like the Super Nintendo or N64 ones, those are just really cool to go back and trying to find like the most optimal places to start drifting, or where to be on the track to avoid a certain hazard at a certain time. That kind of stuff is actually really, really fun, at least for me. And so that's pretty cool. The redone GameCube tracks are really cool too. I don't have any troubles with any of them except for maybe Bowser's Castle, but that's more because of, the overall gameplay as far as the characters, the other opponent racers are concerned. They're extremely competitive, especially on that track, and it can be incredibly frustrating when you're in that final part of the track and you have all these volcanoes going off and asteroids coming down, sometimes coming down from behind you and hitting you. That's the worst part, because those have the same effect as a blue shell. That's probably the worst part. But generally speaking, these tracks are really good, and they give the game a lot of replay value. And I think that's probably like the game's strongest point here, is the sheer number of tracks, and then the variety and quality of those tracks is all excellent in my opinion. I really don't have anything to complain about too much about that. So yeah. So I guess the last aspect of Mario Kart Wii I guess I'll talk about is the soundtrack. And quite honestly, I think this is probably the strongest part of Mario Kart Wii. Now, a lot of people, they kind of leave out the soundtrack or kind of like add it in as sort of like an added thing, but honestly, it's part of the whole experience. And Mario Kart Wii has a lot of character, and I'll say about maybe 75% of that character comes from the music itself. Of course, with the retro tracks, we get, those tracks back, tracks, that's a pun. But no, we get that music back for those tracks for the GameCube, N64, Super Nintendo, and, DS soundtracks. Those make a return with those tracks, but the new Mario Kart Wii tracks have some of the best Mario Kart themes I've heard in a long time, probably ever. I don't know. I haven't played a whole lot of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I still have yet to buy that. I have played it a little bit, but I haven't, and I've played nothing of Mario Kart 7. But as far as Mario Kart Wii's soundtrack is concerned, I think it's really, really superb. There's so much like the dynamic range of tracks that there are. There's also a dynamic range in the music and the soundtrack itself. A lot of different instruments and synths being used, a lot of different timbres to match the theme of every track. It would be really easy to just, do the typical like Mario big band, big brass horn section kind of thing for every single track, wrap it up and call it a day, and people will applaud it because that's all they know Mario music to be. But in this case, in Mario Kart Wii, it's so diverse. There's so much happening. And I have to say, some of my favorite musical moments in this are when the synthesized wind instruments come out, specifically woodwinds. Kind of sounds like maybe an oboe, or more along the lines of an oboe than a clarinet. And there are, whether it's the highway or Maple Tree Way especially, I have to call that one out in particular. That's one of the best racetrack themes in all of Mario Kart, in my opinion. When that wind instrument, whatever it is, when it takes up the main theme of that track and turns it into kind of its own solo, it turns into like real jazz. I mean, that's some real jazz, like improv, and it sounds amazing. It is like a pretentious music fan's dream, I would assume, to hear a solo like that uses all these dissonances and accidentals to add so much color into a track that's supposed to be, you know, maple trees in fall, where, you know, you have the fall colors. It makes sense thematically, and it's like ear candy. You just want more, and it's just fleeting enough to where it leaves you wanting more, but it leaves there long enough for you to really take it in and appreciate it. And all of these tracks have that sort of thing, whether it be some really great grooves or some really energetic tracks, great toned percussion on the Donkey Kong levels. I mean, it's so great. It's so well crafted and so carefully crafted. A lot of people will just consume the soundtrack being like, oh yeah, it's good, obviously Nintendo, good music, blah blah blah. But like, no, if you really listen to it just isolated by itself, and really make it an active experience rather than something you put on in the background or whatever, there's something so substantial here, and it's actually really good listening, unironically so. And in my opinion, this is definitely Mario Kart Wii's strongest aspect. And music is just as important to games as the visuals and the gameplay and everything like that. So it's really not a diss against this game when, after hearing all the things that I've complained about, the soundtrack here is, it being as great as it is as much of a compliment as saying that the gameplay is masterful. So, yes.
Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing!
Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. I remember when this game came out, this was a game that I actually did end up getting on the Wii shortly after it got discounted, basically. And when I saw, I don't think I realized that it was a Wii Remote only control scheme until after I had gotten it, and I had a lot of, let's say, apprehension about that, because I remembered what Mario Kart Wii was like. And while I did like Need for Speed Pro Street, and that game worked really, really well, I also remembered Sonic and the Secret Rings and how that one went. And so I was apprehensive about how Sega would handle the controls. So let's talk about the control input. There are only two. You can either, if you're playing the Wii version, it's the Wii Remote. If you're playing on PC, well, I guess you can use a keyboard and mouse, I suppose. I never did that. Anybody who does keyboard and mouse for racing games, I kind of question your sanity. So excuse me for not talking about the keyboard controls. I'm sure there's probably going to be 2 people on this entire planet who will be upset about that. But as far as using a controller or the Wii remote, which one is better? Honestly, either is okay, I think. So, for all intents and purposes, for full disclosure here, the controller that I used to record my gameplay on PC was a PS5 DualSense controller, and the game works excessively well with it. I mean, it has, I don't even know if it has full controller support. I think it's only partial, but in any event, it works perfectly fine with the PS5 controller. I've also played it with a PS3 controller with that little kind of SCP whatever software, but with the DualSense controller is perfectly great. With the Wii remote, I guess, is the most interesting thing, because it played exactly the way I would have expected Mario Kart Wii to. You hold the Wii remote, just flat with the face facing the ceiling, and you tilt it side to side that way. Drift with the B trigger. I mean, it's very similar to Mario Kart Wii. The only difference is that the speed, the steering speed, is a lot faster. So it's so much more responsive, and you can really duck into corners. In fact, I will say that this game handles so well that when you're coming directly from Mario Kart Wii to this game, you'll have to reorient yourself because you're so used to just chronically understeering that you find yourself oversteering more often in this game than not. But see, that's the interesting thing. The Wii remote input is amazing, honestly. I remember putting in so many hours with the Wii remote on the Wii version of this game that it was just an incredible experience. It was almost like one of the most seamless user interfaces. I wasn't even thinking about it. I wasn't even thinking about it, just using it. And it was fantastic. So motion controls work. They really can work when things are tuned properly, to speak in car terms. And of course, with a controller, you can't really go wrong with that. So honestly, I don't know what else to say. This game just controls extraordinarily well on either Wii or console platforms, I assume, or of course the PC. So yeah, gameplay is the interesting part of Sega and Sonic All-Stars Racing, because this game plays, it just plays very interestingly, and I want to avoid comparisons too early. Let's just talk about this game first and foremost. So, this being a kart racer, of course you're going to have a lot of weapons, and if you're familiar with any other kart racer, especially Mario Kart, then a lot of these weapons and items in general are going to kind of seem familiar, like the red rockets and the green boxing gloves. And there's a weapon here that is a big blue bomb, which is I think the closest thing this game has to a blue shell. And this is a really interesting weapon because despite the fact that it will kind of navigate its way all the way up to first place, you have to manually detonate it. So it's kind of up to the player who fires it to sort of choose where in the track, where among the racers it explodes, which is kind of an interesting analog for this. It makes it kind of analog in that sense, and it puts more responsibility on the player, because this is usually a weapon given to players near the back of one of the last places. So it kind of gives them a certain responsibility to really pay attention to when the best time they think it is to, set that bomb off, because if they don't do it well, then they've sort of wasted their own weapon. So it is a pretty interesting way that they try to balance that out there. We also have a very interesting defensive weapon for people near the front, and those are shields. The shields are really cool because, first of all, the shields will, defend you from pretty much any attack. Second of all, to keep it from being, a broken item, the shields actually wear off. I don't think they can be destroyed, but they have a time limit. So in a way, they're kind of like stars in Mario Kart, but they don't do any damage to other players. They strictly protect you. And then, of course, you have boosts and everything like that. But the big thing that this game has is, I believe it's called the Superstar. And that's if you're in like very, 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 very last place. You're way behind everybody else. You need that boost. And what this basically does is it ups your top speed a little bit. It automatically takes you through the track, and you get an attack that you can use to hit other people to sort of set them back so that you can bring yourself ahead. And that is kind of this game's real big equalizer. But it's not really... You can't just rely on that, especially at the higher difficulties. And that's where things get a little interesting, but I'll get back to that later when we talk about difficulty, which is now. So the way difficulty works here is interesting. So you have an easy, medium, and hard, basically. And all of those series have Grand Prix that you have to go through. And, as a Grand Prix works, you go through tracks, you get the number of points that you need to get in a podium, or ideally in first place at the end of every Grand Prix. And so, on the easy difficulty, easy really gives you the freedom to sort of learn how to control this game in a very, very, very low stakes environment. Easy difficulty is quite easy. And as you master the game's mechanics, the more of a cakewalk easy difficulty becomes until it becomes just a non-issue. As far as, the easy difficulty is concerned, it's really like a tutorial almost, which is actually pretty nice, When you get to medium difficulty, you should be at a point where you've gotten proficient enough at the controls and the physics and everything like that, where when you get into the medium difficulty, it still shouldn't be that tough. You shouldn't be having that hard of a time. Maybe a couple of tracks you're still iffy about, but for the most part, you're able to recover from those races on the other tracks in a Grand Prix and still get first place, at the end of the Grand Prix with relative ease for the most part. I mean, you get to the hard difficulty, it's where the game kind of begins, in my opinion, because this is where you're kind of expected to have some form of high proficiency or indeed mastery of the gameplay, all of the mechanics and the physics, the racing, the tracks, everything. Because this is where this is at the point in the game where if you make a mistake, it'll be much more difficult, significantly more difficult to come back from compared to even medium difficulty, even like the more difficult Grand Prix in the medium difficulty. And that's kind of the difficulty scaling of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. It's really fascinating, actually. And that's where things sort of deviate? I don't think that's the right word. But essentially, this game is about mastery. It's about not taking control, but knowing the controls, knowing how this game works proficiently and just well enough that you can just walk through all of the races in first place and come out on top. And that usually means mastering a number of things. One is drifting. See, your character tends to oversteer pretty regularly, especially at really low speeds. And at high speeds, you of course, things get a little heavier, and so you understeer pretty badly. And on tracks like the Super Monkey Ball ones, that is unacceptable. So drifting is everything in this game, more so than it is in Mario Kart Wii. I know I just made a comparison there, but let me explain. In Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, you drift all the time. If you're not drifting, you are losing ground on the higher difficulties. You need to drift. You are the drift king by high difficulty. There's no excuse why you shouldn't be drifting, even on a straight. Just drift. I mean, you can't really do the fishtail thing like you can in Mario Kart DS, but you need to drift. And the way the drift works is, rather than in, like, say, Mario Kart Double Dash, where every turn the steering wheel you make a counter to the direction your cart is facing, turn left to go right, that sort of thing. You can charge up a boost and then fire it off. Here, it's based on how long you can hold the drift, and I think it works similarly in other Mario Karts too. So that's really important here. The length of the drift dictates the power of your boost, basically, how fast it makes you go and how long it lasts. It really doesn't matter that much as long as you're boosting. In my experience, that's how it works. It doesn't matter how powerful the boost is. Maybe you get a level 2 boost on the same, you'll come around a bend, like corner 3, and you'll exit that on a level 3 boost, but then next time you only get a level 2. Really doesn't matter. Just boost. Boost to win. It's a meme from the Sonic universe of fans, I understand, but that's how this game works. You boost, 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 boost. Every chance you get, just keep boosting. Boost. Just boost. When you're in the air, that doesn't give you an excuse to not figure out a boost, because when you're in the air, you can do tricks. The more tricks you can do, which is 3 is the max that you can really do to affect boost, every trick is 1 level of boost that you land with, as long as you stick the landing, which is another thing. Gotta stick the landing. Of course, there's a risk versus reward thing. If you don't stick the landing, then you just don't get the boost. But if you stick the landing and you did 3 tricks on your way in transit over the air, congratulations, level 3 boost. Leave everybody else behind, kind of. And that's sort of the beauty of this game. You really have to master these tracks. You really have to master boosting, you have to master tricks, and you have to master your items. Items don't really equalize in the same way, and even the great equalizer, the superstar, really doesn't have to change the outcome. There have been so many times where I'll be in a race and 3 different characters will use their superstar, highest difficulty. I'm in first place. I never see them. It's really, really heavily like skill based. It's very much skewed in that direction. But let's talk about the superstar, because that's the only thing that changes between characters. There are no real stats that change or anything like that. You just pick a character for aesthetic purposes, and maybe because you prefer their superstar to the other characters. Personally, I'm not very familiar with all the superstars, just because I was in first place most of the time, so I didn't really use them. Ironically enough, despite the fact that this is Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, I mostly play it as like Opa and Ryo and who else? The Space Channel 9 girl, Ulala. I played mostly as those characters. Again, there's no reason to choose one character over the other except for the superstar and for aesthetic purposes. For me, it was just strictly aesthetic. I really like Space Channel 5 or 9. I really like Ulala as a character. I think she's interesting. I like Ryo because Shenmue, and Opa because Opa is lit. I mean, obviously, they made a reference to Opa Opa in the freaking Sonic and Friends game that just came out, the name of which is escaping me at the moment. But like the point is that yes, characters don't really make that much of a difference, and the superstar is really dependent on how good you are at the game in terms of determining how far up the pack you end up going as a result of that. And if you want to be in first and stay in first place, it's a lot simpler to do that. There's another weapon that I almost forgot to mention that, in all fairness, this isn't the first game to do something like this. I know Crash Team Racing and Diddy Kong Racing are two games that are notoriously underreported about and as far as their influence on the kart racing genre. Mario Kart tends to be the game that does a thing that those games did 20, 30 years ago, and everybody says, this is the first time ever, when it really isn't the case. This game is no exception either, but I'm pretty sure this comes from Crash Team Racing, the truck horn. And that horn is sort of something that Mario Kart Wii desperately needs as a counter or defensive measure against the blue shell. Except this weapon works against all weapons as a defensive measure. And basically it shoots sound waves into 4 directions, and it can hit other racers within that proximity. And additionally, it will blow away any offensive weapons coming up to hit you, especially from behind. This is a really effective tool that, if you are able to execute it properly, can help keep you from being hit by weapons that are higher powered, that could threaten you from, threaten your first place finish. And that is the beauty of it. This game is balanced in such a way where, yes, you have these defensive tools, yes, you have these offensive tools, but it's up to you to execute it. It's very, very manual. And because of that, this is heavily skill-based. And that will be an interesting thing to go into the comparison section with. Because, well, we'll see when we talk about the tracks. So the tracks in Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. So Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing pulls from the entire Sega universe of games. It's mostly Sonic, of course, but you have a number of other tracks from other games. House of the Dead, Super Monkey Ball, Samba de Amigo, those types of games, right? They're all over the place. And so these tracks are basically those themes for the most part. If I'm going to be honest here, the tracks are difficult to talk about because they kind of don't follow any particular theme with regards to the franchise, the Sega franchise they're coming from. That's not entirely the case. The Sonic tracks all make perfect sense for them. I think the tracks pulled, especially from Sonic Heroes, those make total sense. House of the Dead, those tracks are actually pretty good. I think there are 2 of them going around the Korean mansion. It's really fun. It's one of my favorite tracks, actually. The Tokyo track is pretty fun. I really like that one, especially when you're flying through the air. Samba de Amigo, is kind of similar. A lot of these tracks end up being pretty similar, despite having a different coat of paint. There's not really much to differentiate them from each other, save for maybe House of the Dead with the House of the Dead set pieces sort of put in there, and maybe a couple of the Sonic ones. And that's the key thing here. These tracks were made specifically to be mastered with the controls in mind, with the racing in mind. The goals of, finishing the game in first place and getting that gold trophy, which is fine. But when you're coming away from the game, there are only maybe a couple of standout moments, like the casino and the Korean mansion and the Super Monkey Ball courses. And by the tone of my voice, you can probably see that of those three, the last is kind of not very good. Here's the thing. My kryptonite in racing games in general are 90-degree turns. Specifically 90-degree turns. I don't care if it's Mario Kart. I don't care if it's Sega and Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. I don't care if it's Gran Turismo 2 or Forza Motorsport, whatever. Doesn't matter. 90-degree turns, those types of corners are my kryptonite. I hate them. Just so happens that Super Monkey Ball tracks in Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing are full of them. Now, there's one that I can get around pretty easily. That's the one with the big ships. That one, once I'm able to become acclimated and, get my drifting timing down properly and everything like that, that track is actually pretty fun. But the other one in the forest is abhorrent. I really don't like it. Yes, I can eventually master it after a certain period of time, but I would really rather not. I would rather do any other track than that one. I never look forward to racing on that track when I see it come up on the list in the Grand Prix. I really couldn't be bothered. Well, okay, I guess I could because obviously I raced through it, but the point is, if it's any track that I'm guaranteed, I'm not guaranteed first place in, it's those Super Monkey Ball tracks. Unfortunately, those are memorable for the wrong reasons, which is really a shame. But when you theme a racetrack after Super Monkey Ball, like a real track in Super Monkey Ball, you're begging for problems to be had. I mean, I know you can integrate racing into Super Monkey Ball gameplay, but taking a kart racer with completely different physics and gameplay style and shoehorning it into a Super Monkey Ball track, it kind of makes you wonder, what were they thinking, sort of thing. Maybe it seemed like a good idea at the time, but nowadays I could really live without them. I really don't like, especially the forest one. The pirate ship one, I can kind of forgive. That one can be pretty fun because it's easier to get the hang of. I guess it just feels more spacious and wider, but I would pick other tracks before that one anyway. So does it really make it like that much better? I don't know. You be the judge of that. Graphics. Going into Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, you kind of start to think, you start to wonder, how is this game going to be visually? And as it turns out, despite the fact that a lot of the games being released at that time around it were still going for that muted color scheme, this game is actually really vibrant. For a Wii title especially, this game is incredibly vibrant, incredibly colorful, really detailed. Honestly, that kind of detail I'm used to seeing in like Super Mario Galaxy, not a seeming Sonic kart racing clone of Mario Kart, And so because of that, I actually really have to applaud the presentation here. Yes, of course, aliasing. Yes, of course, lower detail compared to the ports. The Xbox 360 port is probably the best looking console port on there. I know people out there like the PS3 version. Personally, I think that lighting is hideous, but that's just me. I think the best visual representation you can get of this game outside of the consoles is on the PC. Just turn everything up to the highest level, highest resolution possible, highest level of detail possible. Everything, just bring it all up to max settings. It looks fantastic even to this day. But on the Wii, it looks great. There are some cool like reflections happening on some parts of like carts, especially there are some carts with reflective bits on there, and that's really cool. You can see a lot of really great detail on the floor, or on the ground as you're drifting. Really gives a good sense of speed. Like little details like that really just help give this game's overall, I don't know, the detail gives a great sense of speed. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know what else there is to it, but the point is that like this game is really good looking for the Wii. It's probably one of the best looking kart racing games on the Wii. Granted, this is one of two that I've experienced and I'm actively aware of at this time, but I mean, can you blame me? Well, this game looks great, honestly, and I remember being really impressed with how well this game stacks up against like the HD consoles, especially. It's just great. I really, really like the graphics. Everything is so clear. Everything is so distinguishable from each other. The graphics never feel like they're doing too much, like the PS3 version of this game. It all just works, and I really like that. So I think the toughest part about this is talking about the soundtrack for Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. And the reason why I say that is because, thinking about it creatively, right? You have a ton of characters from a number of different franchises within the Sega umbrella, right? And so when you're bringing those guys in, how exactly, and you theme certain tracks off of their respective franchises, how do you do that? How do you represent them musically? And the answer these guys pretty much came up with was to basically take themes from, Crazy Taxi or Fantasy Zone, or House of the Dead, let's say, and just kind of just bring them in and just play them. Or Samba de Amigo. That's what, you just take those soundtracks, you put them in there, and there you go. You have some original tracks in here, of course, but for the most part, the bulk of this soundtrack is comprised of tracks from other games. And in those games, some of those are just rips of real songs that existed independent of games. So what you end up getting is something that's actually very Sega, I guess, both in the quality of the compositions that are original to this game, but also Sega in the sense that, they're bringing in some like stuff that isn't proprietary to just games. And while there is a definite theming when it comes to those, using the real songs from games that are represented here, at the same time, because of that, it almost kind of lacks any specific character, the game itself. And I guess it's kind of at the fault of it being kind of a chameleon in terms of integrating a bunch of different franchises together. But because of that, you don't really get... there are some tracks in here that do stand out, but like, those are all of them are the ones that are taken from other games. And so, this game's identity is like, I think I said before, a chameleon. It just depends on what franchise is being represented in the moment. And so because of that, nothing really, really stands out. The menu themes and the credits themes, for me, don't really do it that much. I know there's like a really ripping guitar solo for like the main credit theme and everything like that, but I can't get into. The guitar solo is so over the top itself that I'm kind of just turned off by it. And it's a guitar solo you hear all the time when you get that final cut scene of the podium winners, and you know, if you were in first place or whatever like that, you know, who gets what trophy or whatever. And, you know, it's fine, but at the same time, it doesn't really have any kind of real lasting impact. I feel like this game probably could have done well to have more original tracks. I mean, of course, everybody's going to enjoy, you know, the Sonic tracks on here, you know. It almost feels like a cop-out. It almost feels like in this department, Sega decided to sort of more or less rest on its laurels and, you know, its legacy in terms of the kind of music that they put out there, which is a little bit disappointing considering how Sega game music has a tendency to be really good. And so when you have an example of this where it's like, yeah, here's our greatest hits album. I mean, maybe some people really like greatest hits albums. I'm not really one. But that's, I guess, beside the point. Well, not really. But whatever. I don't know. It's fine. It's an okay, it's a fine soundtrack as a whole. Definitely not worth the sum of its parts. I think its parts alone have greater value than the whole. But for what it is, the soundtrack is acceptable. And so now, it's time for the comparison. So let's first compare the graphics. So graphically, we have Mario Kart Wii and Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. Honestly, you know, despite what a lot of people would like to say that, oh, you know, they're both kart racers, they're both cartoony and colorful and vibrant, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing wins this round. And the reason why I think so is because, if nothing else, even if you like the art style and the graphical presentation doesn't bother you, the fact that you can't see hazards as well in Mario Kart Wii and Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing looks as superb as it does even on limited hardware like the Wii, it just kind of goes to show that Mario Kart Wii is kind of holding back what it could potentially be, and Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing just kind of nails it out of the park with this one. So point 1 goes to Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. Now we get to the controls. And so this is a tricky one, and it might be a no-brainer to a lot of people. It's like, oh, well, you know, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, you said, has no problem with its controls, you know. So obviously it should walk away the winner. But Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing has 2 potential methods of controlling it. Mario Kart Wii has 5 different ways you can control it. And I mean, yeah, 2/5 of them you should avoid like the plague. One of them is strange, but I guess mildly acceptable. I mean, some people like it though, so there is that to also consider. And then 2 of them are the best, and those being the GameCube and the Wii Classic controller. With Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, you have, you know, just the Wii remote or a controller if you're playing on any other console besides the Wii or PC. And after thinking about it, I mean, considering even taking into consideration the fact that Mario Kart Wii does have, you know, controller inputs that are kind of more along the lines of like, you know, for party people and like all that stuff. The fact that Mario Kart still doesn't handle as well as, you know, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing can with just the Wii remote and the motion controls, I have to say that the controls section has to also go to Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. I just feel like as an overall package, you're guaranteed no matter which version of the game you get, that it's going to control exceptionally well, and the interface will not get in the way of your experience. And I think, that should be what the point of controls are. They should be your means of interacting, not the thing preventing you from interacting, which is kind of what the motion controls tend to do in Mario Kart Wii, and that's where I decided to draw the line. So yes, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. So let's do soundtrack next. Alright, because gameplay is going to be more complicated. Soundtracks between these two are, honestly, there's no comparison. Yes, you do have fantastic music tracks on Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, but as a package, all it really is a collection of greatest hits from other games. When you boil it down to just tracks off of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, to me, it's kind of flat. And then you have Mario Kart Wii, where, yes, there are some retro tracks that come in here, of course, but the original tracks here there's still enough of it, and it's so substantial and gives it so much character that when you look at these two games listen to these games side by side, you'll never be able to tell with Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing if it's Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing or if it's, Super Monkey Ball. Whereas Mario Kart Wii is, undeniably Mario Kart Wii. So, because of that, and the fact that Mario Kart Wii is so exquisitely put together and composed musically, that Mario Kart Wii wins by a landslide in terms of its soundtrack. So, yes. And so now, gameplay. Gameplay is going to be a really tricky one because, I guess on paper really isn't that tricky. But, so, let's look at it like this, okay? So, Mario Kart Wii is, as I said before, akin to like a pachinko machine. There is a certain level of skill, sure, but for the most part, the outcome is almost, it's very reliant on how lucky you are. Just kind of like a random throw of the dice almost, that sort of thing. And you can really be screwed over really badly in this game. And as a party game, that works. That's what makes it fun. That's what makes it exciting. That's what makes sure that everybody who's playing, regardless of their skill level, can feel like, that there's some level of competition. And that is perfectly fine. But this is being looked at in the perspective of a single player. I want to get all the gold trophies in all difficulties on all tracks in Grand Prix, blah, blah, blah. That kind of perspective. And because of that, that's where it goes from, oh, haha, fun party game, pachinko, slot, whatever, to I don't understand why my being in first is being punished constantly by rubber banding AI. Rubber banding meaning that they are just nailing you with weapons, really cheap ones too. And you have limited means of defending yourself from those things. So the balance really disappears. You're not really competing against unskilled people relying on overpowered weapons. Now you're relying on the highest difficulty setting for AI using the most powerful weapons against you. in first place, because they all home in on you for the most part. There's maybe a little bit of infighting between them, I'm sure, but most of the time it's all you, buddy. And I think that's ultimately the biggest thing about this. It is very reliant on luck. When you look at Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, because everything is so manual, because everything is so analog, because even the most overpowered weapons are dependent on how well you can utilize them, it ends up being very heavily skill-based. And so as a multiplayer experience, if you're playing against another person who isn't as good at the game as you, they're not going to have very much fun. And so as a multiplayer experience, again, that game kind of falters. It's really dependent on the player's skills. But as a single player experience, like, there is a sense of mastery, a sense of a need for mastery of controls and of the racing mechanics and the weapons and everything that I've mentioned previously, that, I mean, you can't win without having mastered the controls and the tracks and navigating yourself through them. And that's fine. However, there is an asterisk here, and this is where things get a little nuanced, because even though, yes, skill means, you feel more accomplished, you get that intrinsic feeling, the game ends up being kind of short, on the short side, and you see a lot of the same tracks over and over again, which of course, I mean, it has its benefits. It means you get a lot of practice on those tracks, but also, because of the limited track selection compared to Mario Kart Wii, at least that's how it seems, you once you finish, all the Grand Prix on all the difficulties, there's almost no reason to go back to it. The replay value here really, I guess, relies on whether or not you want to grind out the cash, the in-game currency, to buy the rest of the characters. And the characters are, again, just glorified skins with a special weapon that you're probably not going to end up using if you're good enough at the game to stay in first place. So the incentives to continue playing this game are wholly reliant on just how much you like the game. And it kind of raises, that question of, like, why should I? I mean, I guess you could do the time trials and everything like that. That adds some replay value. But generally speaking, the experience, if you're good enough at the game, is always going to be kind of the same. Whereas with Mario Kart Wii, because of how chaotic and crazy it could be, the outcomes are always going to be kind of random. And I mean, while that can play against your favor if you're trying to go for gold on all Grand Prix and everything like that, at the same time, because you're guaranteed a different experience every time you enter a race, there is some level of variety there. There's an argument to be made that there is a lot of replay value in that alone. And so, looking at these games side by side, they are kind of inverse of one another. One isn't really necessarily a clone of the other in a one-to-one term, but more of like a 1 to -1. I mean, if that's even a thing. And that is sort of like, that's a weird duality to have with these games. And choosing between these two because of that is actually more difficult than I might have made it out to be when I first talked about Mario Kart Wii. So, as opposed to Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, which is a terribly long title I can't believe I keep saying entirely. Anyway, so, because of all of that, I had to make a decision over, which one I'm going to do, right? Which one am I going to pick? And, we have a game with a lot of character that's also really dependent on just luck, whereas you have a game with fewer tracks that give you a chance to master them, and the controls is very skill dependent. That is, it depends on how skillful you are at the game in order to accomplish your goals. Even though the tracks don't really have as much character, and the soundtrack and all that stuff, the one that I have to go with ultimately is maybe predictably Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. And the reason why is because while yes, replay value is kind of sketchy, if the journey to mastery and the fulfillment that you get from like crushing your opponents at the highest difficulty towards the end of those Grand Prix, the last few Grand Prix in that series, that is, in my opinion, one of the most fun experiences. It's just a shame that it ends so soon. It feels like when you enter hard difficulty, that's where the game starts. But for what it is, that stretch of races, honestly, you can't go wrong there. Whereas with Mario Kart Wii, it's easy. It's like really easy, and then random chance, good luck. And so ultimately, I decided to go with Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing here for those reasons. And then, like, just an overall, which one do I like the best? Honestly, I really can't choose between these two. I think they are both equally good at what they do and what they aim to do. And so because of that, I have to give them both a point for that. I feel like it would be just weird to pick one over the other when they are kind of like so opposite in their aims and what they're trying to do. Especially considering how well they each accomplish it. The experience is so different between the two that just saying, well, I mean, I guess I could choose one I liked better, but in this case, I really can't. I like them both equally, just for completely different reasons. So they both get a point here. But yeah, I guess that means that Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing wins this contest, this comparison. Now, again, I need to reiterate, as a single player playing to beat the game experience, this is the outcome for me on my own. I'm not trying to say that it's the better game, period, exclamation point. I'm just saying, for me, between these two, I think that Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing just does what it does. Well, not does what it does better, but I guess I prefer it, right? That's my preference. So, yeah, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing beats Mario. The ripoff wins! Yay! Crowd applause, sound effect here. But yeah, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm looking forward to making more of these comparison videos, not just Sonic and Mario, but like other game franchises also. I have a lot of ideas for this, man. A lot of ideas, and hopefully this video gains a little bit of traffic. I mean, that would be cool. I haven't seen any videos like this doing direct comparisons, and this is a little bit of an unscripted video. I'm trying to do something a little bit different here to sort of expedite the process of being able to make these videos, because they are pretty long, as you can tell. But yeah, I hope if you've made it this far, I hope you enjoyed this. I will see you next time, hopefully, with something new. And I'm hoping it will be another one of these comparison videos, because I like doing these. It's a fun mental exercise for me. So yeah, I'll see you then. Until next time.